The function was 342 lines long, and nobody in the company had written it. I know because I asked everyone. We got bought in November 2022. Some fintech giant picked up our startup for parts, mostly the payments engine, and due diligence included a full code audit. 3 of us got pulled off feature work to do it. 60,000 lines of Python, some of it going back to 2014, most of it fine, some of it embarrassing, normal stuff. Our office was in Soma, above a blue bottle. 4th floor, big windows, the kind that fog up when it rains, and it rained a lot that December. I was doing most of the audit alone at night because the open plan was quieter after 7. Just the hum of the vending machine, the click of my keyboard, and the guy from the design agency downstairs practicing guitar. I found it on a Tuesday, about a week before Christmas. The function was called _reconcile, _ledger, _v2. It lived in a utilities module nobody touched. First commit dated January 14th, 2015. Author field, blank. Not unknown user, not a deleted account, blank. Git doesn't usually let you do that. I've been writing code for 11 years, and I've never seen a commit with no author at all. That was weird enough to make me pause, but not weird enough to stop the audit. I made a note and moved on. About an hour later, I came back to it, because I couldn't find anywhere in the codebase that actually called _reconcile, _ledger, _v2. Not in the API layer, not in the workers, not in the cron jobs. grep turned up nothing. It was just sitting there, alive in the repo, part of every deploy for 8 years, and never invoked by any code path I could see. Dead code, I thought. Happens all the time in old repos. Someone writes a helper, forgets to wire it up, it lingers. I flagged it for deletion and kept going, but something bugged me about the length. 342 lines is a lot for dead code. Most orphaned helpers are 10, 20 lines. So around 11 at night, I got a second coffee from the machine, put on headphones, and actually read the thing. It wasn't a helper, it was a whole self-contained little program. The style was clean, almost obsessive. 2 space indents in a codebase that was otherwise 4. Type hints where type hints barely existed yet in 2015. Comments in a very specific voice, dry and technical, no ego. I'd been writing Python since college, and I could usually recognize a coding style the way you recognize handwriting. This one didn't match anyone we still had. The first 100 lines pulled data, user records mostly, email addresses, hashed passwords, phone numbers where we had them, the last 4 of any card on file, transaction summaries. It didn't dump the whole database. It sampled. About 2% of users, chosen by a hash of their sign-up date. Consistent selection. Same users every time. I tried to reproduce the sample locally, ran the selection logic with today's data. The list it produced was 142 people. I recognized 3 of the names. One of them was our head of sales. The next 100 lines packaged it. Compressed, encrypted with a public key, hard-coded at the top of the file. I didn't recognize the key. It wasn't one of ours. The last 140 lines sent it, or tried to. The destination wasn't hard-coded as a string. The function assembled it at runtime, out of variables spread across half the file, so a plain text search for the domain would never have hit anything. Somebody had gone out of their way to make sure grep wouldn't find it. There was a scheduling block near the bottom I'd missed on the first pass. It used the system clock. If the current date was January 1st, and the current time was between 0:00:000 and 00:00:59 UTC, it would fire. Otherwise, it returned. None immediately, which is why nobody's profiler ever caught it. 342 lines of code that pretended to be dead for 364 days a year. The recipient was a domain. I'll change the name here, but it looked something like ledger-sync-services.net. I opened a new tab and pinged it. No response. I ran a whois. The domain didn't exist, not expired, not for sale, no record at all. For a while, I just sat there with my hand on the mouse, not doing anything. The screen went to sleep. I nudged it back on. It went to sleep again. I don't know how long. Then I did what any engineer would do. I went to check the deploy history and the application logs to see if the function had ever actually executed. It had, every January 1st since 2015, 8 executions. Each one logged as OK 200 response 3.2 seconds average. Whatever it was sending to, whatever that non-existent domain resolved to, something on the other end had been answering the phone for 8 years. I want to say I felt something dramatic at that point. I didn't. I just felt cold and a little dumb, like I'd walked into a room I wasn't supposed to be in and hadn't noticed until now. I remember the taste of the coffee going stale in my mouth, and the sound of the guitar downstairs, which stopped around then, and the rain on the window. I deleted the function, pushed the change to a branch, and emailed our CTO. It was almost 1 in the morning. I kept it short, said I'd push the removal and he could review it in the morning. He called me at 1:14 a.m. He didn't say hello. He said, "You're sure nobody calls it?" I told him I was sure. I'd checked with static analysis and grepped every branch, including the historical ones. He was quiet for a second. Then he asked me to send him the file. Not the diff, the file. I sent it. He said okay and hung up. I walked home around 2. My apartment was in the Mission, 20 minutes on foot, and the streets were empty except for delivery guys on their bikes. I stopped at the 24-hour taqueria on Valencia and ate a burrito standing up because I didn't want to sit down. I kept doing math in my head. 8 years, 2% of users. Whoever registered that domain had data going back to when the company had 400 customers and a leaky Mongo instance. They had years of us. They probably had me. I'd signed up as a test user in 2017 and never deleted the account. He came into the office the next morning at 7, which he never did. He was already at his desk when I got in around 9. He'd shaved and put on a shirt, but his eyes had that specific flatness you get from a night without sleep. He waved me over and turned his monitor. He'd pulled the outbound traffic logs from our egress gateway. Every January 1st, 0100 UTC, from 2015 to 2022, there was a spike. Small, but consistent. Encrypted payload, average 4.1 megabytes, destination IP resolved through a chain of relays he was still trying to unwind. The domain itself never appeared in DNS the way you'd expect. It looked like the function had its own resolver logic buried somewhere in one of those middle 100 lines I hadn't read as carefully. He asked me who wrote it. I told him the author field was blank. He said, "I know, I'm asking you." I said I didn't know. He spent the next 2 weeks asking everyone else, every current engineer. He pulled the list of everyone who'd ever had commit access, going back to the founders, and asked them too. 2 guys who'd left in 2016 didn't answer their emails. Everyone else said no. One of the founders got kind of insulted about it. Our first back-end hire, a woman who'd left in 2019 to have a kid, laughed on the call and said if she'd written 300 lines of clean code in a single commit, she'd have remembered. Legal pulled the domain registration. It had been registered anonymously through a privacy service in December 2014, 2 weeks before the function appeared in our repo. The registrant paid in cash equivalent crypto for a 2-year term and then renewed it, on schedule, every 2 years, from a different funding source each time. The last renewal was October 2022, paid through 2024, but the domain didn't exist. That's the part I keep circling back to. Who's had no record, DNS had no record, and yet something on the other side of that request had been answering with 200 OK for 8 years, and someone had been paying for a domain nobody could see. The acquisition went through in February. I don't know if the buyers were ever told. I left the company in April for reasons that had nothing to do with any of this, or at least that's what I tell myself. The CTO called me once more, in late January. He said the logs from January 1st, 2023 were clean. Nothing went out, because I'd deleted the function. Then he said, "So we know it worked. We know something was listening. We just don't know what, or who, or why." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Whoever wrote that thing is still out there, and they know the payload didn't arrive this year." I hadn't thought about that until he said it. I thought about it a lot after. I've been working with census data for 11 years, and until last spring, I would have told you the scariest thing about my job was the coffee in the break room. That changed on a Wednesday in May 2021, when I ran a routine cross-check on a small county in South Georgia, and the numbers refused to reconcile. I worked out of a shared analytics office in Atlanta, off Peachtree, in one of those buildings where every floor looks like every other floor. My desk faced a window that hadn't been cleaned since I started. Most of what I did was boring in a way that only makes sense if you've done it. Population totals from the 2020 count were being reconciled against every other dataset the government keeps on people. Voter rolls, tax filings, public school enrollment, Medicare, driver's licenses, utility hookups. The idea is simple. A person shows up in more than one place. If the counts don't line up across systems, someone's math is wrong, and my job is to figure out whose. The county I want to talk about had a population of just under 4,000. Rural, 2 incorporated towns, one of which was really more of a gas station and a post office. I'm not going to name it, I signed things. Let's just call it 100 and something square miles of pine and pasture, about 3 hours south of the office. The first flag was small. The 2020 count came in about 120 higher than the 2010 count, which by itself isn't strange. What was strange was that every other data set for that county had gone down. Voter registration, down. K-12 enrollment, down. Number of tax returns filed, flat. Utility hookups, actually down by 7. Deaths outpacing births by a decent margin. The whole county was quietly emptying, the way rural counties do, and yet the census had it growing. I ran it again, same result. I pulled the raw enumerator data, same result. I told my supervisor and she said what she always said, which was, "Interesting, write it up when you get a chance." She meant it, but she wasn't going to lose sleep over one county. The problem was I kept opening the file. I'd finish something else, and my hand would drift back to that spreadsheet like it was a scab. Over about a week, I got granular. I broke the discrepancy down by block group, then by census tract, then by individual address. Most of the county was clean. The 120-person surplus came from 12 specific addresses, not spread out, 12 houses, all in the same corner of the county, on 3 roads that formed a rough triangle around what used to be a poultry processing plant. I pulled the addresses in the property records, all real, all owned, not by the residents. 9 of the 12 were owned by the same LLC, registered to a P.O. box in a suburb of Macon. The other 3 were owned by 2 individuals whose names were on the LLC as officers. I pulled the census forms for those 12 addresses. Some of them listed 15 occupants, one listed 22. The enumerator had checked the box for in-person interview at every one of them. Names were written in, first and last, ages. Relationships to householder, most of them logged as unrelated. No social security numbers, but the census doesn't require those. Nothing on those forms was technically wrong. Everything on those forms was, if you looked at it for more than a minute, extremely wrong. Nobody at those addresses voted. Nobody at those addresses paid state income tax. Nobody had a kid in the county school system. Nobody had filed for unemployment during the pandemic, which was odd, because in that same window, half the county had. Nobody had a driver's license issued in Georgia. I ran a few of the names against SSA death records just to make sure I wasn't looking at ghosts. Nothing. Those names existed exactly once in the entire federal apparatus, and it was on the 2020 census. I sat with that for a while. I want to be honest about what I felt, because it wasn't a movie feeling. It was more like when you notice something wrong at a neighbor's house, and you don't want to make it about you. I kept telling myself I was overreading a data quality issue. Enumerators cut corners. Whole households get invented sometimes when the census can't reach a place and quotas are tight. That's a known problem. That's why we cross-check. But the invented households I'd seen before were sloppy. This was neat. Every form filled out the same way, same handwriting on the scanned images, same enumerator ID. I looked up the enumerator. He'd been contracted for that region, worked the door-to-door phase in the fall of 2020, filed his forms, got paid, and hadn't been rehired for the follow-up. Not flagged. Not disciplined, just done. I pulled the addresses up on Street View. Small ranch houses, some brick, some vinyl siding, the kind of houses you drive past without registering. One of them had a chain link fence with green privacy slats woven through it. Another had 2 window units running on a wall where I'd expect one. In 2 of the photos, the driveways had 6 or 7 cars in them. Not new, not junked, just working cars, parked tight. The processing plant on the corner had closed in 2018, according to the news article I found. Chicken. There'd been a labor dispute right before it shut. Some fines, nothing that made national news. The building had been sold in 2019 too, and I'll give you one guess, the same LLC. That was the moment my stomach did the thing it does when you understand something before your brain has caught up. I did not drive down there. I want to be clear about that. I thought about it for about 10 minutes on a Friday afternoon, and then I thought about it as a person with a mortgage and a job and no business showing up at somebody's front door. I closed the browser tab with the street view on it, and I opened my email. I did 2 things that afternoon that I hadn't done before in 11 years. I wrote up the anomaly formally with the address list and the cross-reference tables, and I sent it to the regional office at the Census Bureau. Then I opened a second draft and sent essentially the same packet to a tip line at ICE's Homeland Security Investigations. Not the deportation side, the trafficking side. I'd been to a training 2 years earlier where somebody from HSI had come and given a talk about labor cases, and he'd said, half joking, that the best tips they got came from accountants. I remembered the email address from the handout. I sent it cold. I did not tell my supervisor. I told myself I'd tell her Monday. On Monday, I told myself Tuesday. By Wednesday, there was a message on my desk phone from a number I didn't recognize, asking me to call back at my convenience regarding a data referral. The joint operation happened about 6 weeks later. I only know pieces of it, and most of what I know I got from a follow-up interview, and later, a very carefully worded press release. The 12 houses were not 12 houses in the ordinary sense. 10 of them had been modified, interior walls added, basements finished without permits and split into bunk rooms. One of them had a converted garage with plywood dividers and a single toilet for what looked like 14 people. The old processing plant had been partially reopened, not for chickens, for something adjacent I never got the full picture on. Workers were bussed from the houses to the plant before sunrise and back after dark. Their documents, the ones they'd come with, were being held by the men who owned the LLC. Wages were paid in cash, minus rent, minus food, minus a debt that never got smaller. 113 people were removed from those houses, not 120. I've thought about the missing 7 more than I want to admit. Here's the part that stuck with me. Every single one of those 113 was in my data. Names spelled the way they'd said them at the door, ages roughly right. The census enumerator, whatever else he'd done or been paid to do, had actually knocked, and they had actually answered. And for one afternoon in the fall of 2020, someone in the United States government had written their names down. It was the only place they existed. If I hadn't pulled that county, they would have stayed a rounding error in a report nobody reads. I still work with census data. I still run the cross-checks. My supervisor knows now. She doesn't ask me why I keep flagging small counties. I used to think the census was a head count, a civic chore, something you do so the roads get paved in the right places. I don't think that anymore. I think about the enumerator sometimes, whether he understood what he was looking at when he wrote those names in, whether he was told not to ask, whether he needed the money. I never saw his face. I never met the people in the houses. I did my job on a Wednesday in May, and the numbers did the rest. I hike alone a lot. That's the setup you need to understand what I'm about to tell you, because otherwise the whole thing sounds stupid, like I was asking for it. I wasn't. I've done Zion, Bryce, Escalante, chunks of the Wonderland Trail up in Washington, all solo, and I've never had a problem past the usual creepy guy at a trailhead who wants to chat too long. This was a Wednesday in mid-September 2021. Zion was still busy from the summer, but weekdays in the shoulder season are the trick. You get the same trails with a fraction of the people. I was doing a loop that started off West Rim and cut down through Telephone Canyon. Long day, about 16 miles, depending on how you piece it together. I checked in at the visitor center that morning and talked to a ranger named Kyle. Tall guy, red beard, the kind of park employee who actually looks at your gear instead of just nodding. He asked how much water I had. I told him 3 liters plus a filter. He said good, and drew a little line on my map where the seasonal spring might still be running. I remember Kyle's name because I wrote it on the back of my hand with a Sharpie before I got out of the car. That's just a thing I do. If I get hurt and someone finds me, I want the last person I spoke to written on my skin. It sounds morbid when I say it out loud. It saved me exactly once, which is enough. I got on trail around 7, cold at the top. The kind where your fingers hurt for the first mile, and then you forget about it. Ponderosa smell, frost on the wooden bridges. I passed maybe 6 people the whole first 2 hours, mostly older couples doing shorter out and backs. That was the last real cluster before the trail got quiet. I met the 2 guys around 9:30 at a switchback about a mile past the junction with the Telephone Canyon cutoff. They were sitting on a log eating something out of a Ziploc, both white, both maybe mid-30s. One heavy, in a green shirt, no pack, the other one skinny, a gray beanie in September, which was already too warm for it. The skinny one had a small day pack, real small, like a kid's school bag. That was the first thing that caught me, because you don't do West Rim with a bag that size. You just don't. There's no water up there in September, and it's exposed. I said hi as I passed. The heavy one said, "Hey back." The skinny one didn't say anything. He was looking at my legs when I went by, which, whatever, guys do that. I'm used to it. I kept walking. About 20 minutes later, I stopped for water at a big flat rock. I sat with my back against a juniper and took my boots off to check a spot on my heel. That's when I heard them coming up the trail behind me, talking, but low. Not the way you talk to a friend, the way you talk when you don't want to be overheard. They came around the bend and both of them looked at me, not glanced. Looked. The heavy one nodded and kept walking. The skinny one stared straight at my socks on the rock next to me for a second too long before he followed his friend. I let them get out of sight. Then I put my boots back on and kept going. Here's the part where I'll be honest. My first thought wasn't fear, it was annoyance. I hate having anyone in front of me on a trail because then I have to think about whether I'm going to pass them again or hang back. I decided I'd give them a big head start and just do my own pace. I didn't see them for maybe 40 minutes. I figured they were long gone. The trail climbed up onto the plateau, exposed slick rock, wind, that big empty view where you can see for miles. I stopped at an overlook to eat a bar and drink some water. Cliff Bar, peanut butter. I remember because I dropped the wrapper and had to chase it before it went over. That's when I saw them again. They were maybe 200 yards back, on the last switchback before the plateau. Both stopped. The heavy one was pointing at something off trail, but the skinny one was looking at me. When he saw I was looking back, he turned his head away, slow, like he was trying to make it seem natural. I'm going to skip ahead a little, because the middle of this took an hour and a half, and most of it was me walking and doing math. I sped up. Not obvious, just my normal fast pace. 10 minutes later, I looked back at a spot where the trail bent around a rock formation. They were the same distance behind me, 200 yards, give or take, which meant they'd sped up too. I slowed way down, pretended to fuss with my pack, made a big show of taking my camera out and shooting the canyon like I was going to be there a while. If they were normal hikers, they'd pass me. That's what hikers do. You catch up, you say hi, you go around. They stopped too, sat down on the trail. Not at a viewpoint, not on a good rock, just sat down where they were, in the dirt, and waited. That was the moment my stomach dropped. Not a movie moment, no music, just a quiet, private understanding of what was happening. I picked my pack up and kept walking. Normal pace. I didn't look back for a while because I didn't want them to know I knew. I kept my hands loose. I ran through what I had. Knife on my hip, 3-inch blade, mostly for opening food. Trekking poles. Bear spray in the side pocket of my pack, which I'd been carrying since a bad bluff charge in Glacier 2 summers before. 3 liters of water, maybe 2 left. Phone at 78%, no signal since the trailhead. The trail was about to hit a junction. West Rim continues north toward the shuttle stop at the grotto, which is where every sane person on that trail is headed. There's a less used spur that drops east into a side canyon and eventually links back to a service road. I'd been planning to take the main route. Everyone takes the main route. It's the whole point. I took the spur. I don't fully know why. Part of me thought if they were just weird and unlucky, they'd keep going toward the shuttle like normal people. Part of me, and this is the part I'm less proud of, thought that if something was going to happen, I'd rather it happen where I knew the exact turn to make, and they wouldn't. I made the turn at a normal pace, like I'd meant to all along, went about 100 yards down, waited at a bend where I could see the junction through a gap in the brush. Both of them came to the junction. The heavy one stopped and looked up the main trail. The skinny one pointed down my spur. They stood there for maybe 15 seconds. Then they both turned and followed me. Okay, I want to say something here about how you think you'll act in a situation like that. You picture running, or screaming, or getting the bear spray in your hand and turning around and telling them to back off. I didn't do any of that. My whole body went very calm and very stupid at the same time. I remember thinking about my dog, who was at my sister's place in Salt Lake. Nothing dramatic, just her name over and over, like a song stuck in my head. I kept walking. The spur was narrower and rougher, loose rock, a lot of exposed root. I could hear them behind me now. They weren't hiding it anymore. Boots on gravel, occasional low voice, not close enough to make out words, but close enough that I could tell when one of them said something and the other one answered. I had one idea. It was stupid, but it was the only one I had. I pulled my phone out of my hip pocket, held it up like I was checking for signal, which I already knew I didn't have. Then I put it to my ear and I started talking. Kyle, hey, it's me from this morning, the West Rim solo. Yeah, I'm about to come down off the spur into the drainage. I'll be at the checkpoint in like 30. Yeah, 2 guys, 1 green shirt, 1 gray beanie. They've been behind me since the switchbacks passed the junction. No, I don't need you to send anyone up. I just want it on record. Okay, yeah, 20, 30 tops. Green shirt, gray beanie. Yeah, thanks Kyle. I said it loud. Louder than a normal phone call. I said his name 3 times and I described their clothes twice and I gave a time and a location. I didn't turn around while I said any of it. I just kept walking, phone at my ear, like I was mildly annoyed at having to make the call. The call didn't go through. I never had a signal on that spur. The screen just said searching the whole time. They didn't know that. The voices behind me stopped first. Then the footsteps got slower. Then, after maybe a minute, they stopped too. I didn't hear them start again. I walked. I didn't run, because running is the thing that turns a maybe into a definitely. I walked fast and even, and I didn't look back for a long time. When I finally did, at a spot where the spur opened up and I could see a long stretch behind me, there was no one there. I got back to the road 3 hours later. I hitched a ride from a couple in a Subaru who were doing the shuttle loop backward. They didn't ask why I was crying a little bit. The woman just handed me a bottle of water and turned the AC up. At the visitor center, I found Kyle. I told him everything, in order, without any drama, because I'd been rehearsing it in my head for 4 hours. He wrote it down. He asked me if I could describe the packs, the boots, anything else, and I could, because I'd been paying attention for a reason by then. An hour later, a ranger truck rolled up with the 2 of them in the back seat. They'd come out at the grotto shuttle, which meant at some point they'd doubled back to the main trail. The rangers had them on the parking lot for a long time. I sat inside and watched through the window while somebody went through the skinny one's day pack on the hood of the truck. I don't know what was in it. Nobody told me. They weren't arrested, at least not that day. Kyle came in after and said they'd been talked to, IDs run, and asked to leave the park. He said if I wanted to file a formal report, I could, and I did. I drove back to Salt Lake that night, picked up my dog, slept 12 hours. The Sharpie was still on the back of my hand when I woke up.